Welcome to the debate. So, what happens when you take, 1,000-year-old mystical tradition, 144 hours of unbroken fasting, and just mix it with 10 broken computers running on a dying generator?
It's quite the image, right? I mean, we usually picture tech education happening in these sterile, brightly lit rooms.
Right, with a very linear, observable progression of skill acquisition.
Exactly. We like the syllabus mapped out. We want quantifiable metrics.
Yeah, and conversely, when we think of ancient spiritual traditions, it's all isolated mountain caves and extreme physical asceticism, a total withdrawal from the modern world.
Yeah, definitely.
But today, we're exploring this fascinating autobiographical account that just forcefully collides those two worlds. We're looking at a narrative from a practitioner who spent time at the Shanti Ashram in the Tottapalli Hills, engaging in intense Natha Sampradaya yoga practices, while simultaneously teaching computer skills to marginalized kids from the local Koya tribe.
And we should probably note right up front, they achieved this by deliberately breaking quite a few of the ashram's rules along the way.
Oh, definitely. Which brings us to our core tension today. Does this narrative show us a successful, replicable pedagogical framework synthesizing ancient spiritual discipline and modern tech? Or is it really just a highly subjective, idiosyncratic approach that relies on rule-breaking and, frankly, personal exceptionalism?
Right.
I'll argue that the author brilliantly and pragmatically integrates ancient tools, specifically dharana, or intense concentration, with modern psychology and tech.
And I will argue that the author's methods, which rely heavily on disruptive rule-breaking, cinematic spectacle, and honestly, untestable mystical claims, really constitute an unscalable personal mythology, rather than any cohesive educational or scientific synthesis.
Well, let me start by laying out why I see this as a profound success. I mean, the author's approach is, in my view, a total triumph of what their guru, Raparthi Ramarao, called Purna Yoga.
Wait, sorry, before we move on, let's clarify for the listener what we mean by Purna Yoga. It's so easy to just throw these terms around.
Fair point, yeah. So Purna basically means complete or whole. In this tradition, it's the integration of four major yogic paths that are usually kept pretty separate. You have jnana, which is the path of intellect and knowledge, raja, the path of mental discipline and meditation, hatha, the physical endurance practices, and karma, the path of selfless action or service.
Right, so historically someone might just sit in a cave to practice Raja Yoga.
Exactly. But this author takes the cognitive focus built in that meditation and actually applies it to the world as karma yoga. I mean, look at the empirical success with these Koya tribal children.
If you can call it empirical.
Well, previous IT trainers came in and they utterly failed, right? Because they delivered these standard dry lectures. But our author understood the need for interactive visual clues, immediate gratification.
Yeah, but
Teaching these kids blindfolded touch typing of complex Sanskrit texts is a brilliant modernization of traditional spiritual discipline. It basically turns a computer lab into a gymnasium for cognitive development.
I mean, while the narrative is undeniably charming, and yes, the author's dedication to these children is super clear, the methodology completely lacks rigor.
How so?
Well, you call it a pedagogical success, but that so-called success relied on intentionally breaking ashram rules to show the Hollywood sci-fi film Avatar just to get the kids' attention. That isn't a replicable educational model.
They got them in the door, though.
Sure, but furthermore, while the author claims to correlate spiritual experiences with modern physics and medical science via the internet, the actual claims they make are really extreme.
They're pushing boundaries?
They talk about meditating for 144 hours continuously, aiming for a 168-hour target. They talk about performing remote healing for patients in comas. This severely blurs the line between foundational education and highly subjective extreme mysticism.
Okay, let's move directly into that classroom at Shanti Ashram, because context is everything here. We are talking about 10 computers donated by Infosys.
Right.
The power infrastructure is so fragile that the computers frequently crash because they're running on local generators. And the students? These are Koya tribal children. Many were left at the hostel because their parents had to travel for months for work. They are highly marginalized, restless, disconnected.
I definitely acknowledge the difficulty of that environment. I mean, the author explicitly notes you had to walk 3 kilometers up a hill just to get a basic cell signal.
Right, exactly. So into this incredibly challenging environment come the previous IT trainers. These were well-meaning former Ashram students now settled in the corporate IT industry, and they brought in standard science materials and moral downloads.
Standard curriculum.
Yes, standard dry curriculum. And the kids were disruptive and disengaged. They completely rejected the lessons. But our author realizes that these specific children require immediate gratification.
Okay, but
They need a hook to build their tolerance for the frustration of learning a new difficult skill like typing. It's like sneaking vegetables into a kid's favorite meal, you know?
look, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Showing Avatar against the explicit rules of the ashram isn't a groundbreaking educational strategy. It's a populist stunt.
A stunt? That's a bit harsh.
I don't think so. Any substitute teacher can walk into a math class, turn off the projector, put on a multi-million-dollar Hollywood blockbuster, and claim they have engaged the students. You haven't taught them anything sustainable. You've just pacified them with entertainment.
But they didn't just watch a movie.
Right, but then having them do blindfold touch typing of Sanskrit chants? That feels like a parlor trick masking as education. Is this genuinely preparing them for the digital economy, or is it just a spectacle to impress the visiting ashram leadership?
I think you are vastly underestimating the cognitive mechanics at play here. First, regarding the film, Avatar is fundamentally about indigenous populations, their connection to nature, and the friction of technological displacement. For Koya tribal children, that narrative resonates perfectly.
Sure, the themes match.
But to your point about the typing being a parlor trick, let's look at the underlying physiological mechanism. What does blindfolded touch typing of Sanskrit actually do?
It proves you've memorized a keyboard layout.
Oh, it goes much deeper than that. Think of it like a muscle memory code compiling. The sci-fi movie is just the entry point, the immediate gratification. But the actual work typing the Vishnu and Lalitha Sahasranams in English, Telugu, Hindi, and Sanskrit while blindfolded, it forces the brain's hemispheres to synchronize.
Synchronize?
Yes, you have the tactile, physical memory of the fingers finding the keys without visual input, combined with the auditory rhythmic chanting of ancient Sanskrit syllables. This demands absolute single-pointed concentration.
Okay, I see where you're going with the flow state.
Exactly. It induces a flow state. The author isn't just teaching them where the Q and W keys are. They are neurologically training these children to sustain intense focus. And the text proves it worked. The younger kids in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades were literally begging to join the typing drills.
Well, yeah.
The district educational officer and the Mendel educational officer both praised this specific method.
I mean, praise from officials who were just shocked to see marginalized children sitting quietly does not automatically validate the methodology as scientifically sound.
It validates the engagement.
Fair, but let's look at the underlying philosophy driving this, right? This concept of cognitive focus, or dharana. The author is applying their own intensive spiritual focus to this computer lab, and the author's heritage is heavy. We are talking about the Natha Sampradaya lineage. Let's unpack what that means, because this isn't, your local suburban studios vinyasa class.
Definitely not. It traces back to legendary 10th and 11th century figures like Matsyendranath and Goraknath.
Exactly. The founders of Hatha Yoga, and their tradition is historically associated with extreme physical asceticism, alchemy, and the pursuit of siddhis, which are literal supernatural powers.
Right.
Now, the author claims that their guru modernized this into Purna Yoga, making it practical for the modern age. But I look at the author's own life and I see massive friction between empirical reality and mystical ambition.
Friction where?
Well, this is someone who talks about sitting in a brahmachari hut, taking a single meal a day, and meditating for 144 hours straight. 6 unbroken days of meditation.
Which requires incredible discipline.
Sure, but then they claim to be synthesizing this with modern physics and physiology using the internet. That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that you cannot empirically validate a 144-hour mystical state using Wikipedia articles on quantum mechanics?
They weren't just using Wikipedia.
But the epistemology here is completely fractured. They are using the language of science to dress up what is fundamentally an esoteric, untestable religious experience.
See, I think you have to look at how modern this approach actually is. To frame this for a contemporary listener, Think about the extreme biohacking we see today.
Biohacking?
Yeah, you have Silicon Valley executives going on 3-day dopamine fasting retreats or doing extreme temperature therapy to force physiological shifts in their nervous systems.
Okay, yes, that is a trend.
What the author is doing, 144 hours of unbroken meditation, is basically an ancient, incredibly extreme version of hacking the human autonomous nervous system. And the author is deeply grounded in the practical world while doing this.
Grounded how? I mean, 6 days in a hut is the literal opposite of grounded.
Look at their timeline. In 2011, they sold their bookshop, which they'd run since 1988, to fully enter the tech support field for local businesses. When they finally went to the Shanti Ashram for extended practice, they didn't just hide in the cave.
No, they didn't.
Right, their daily routine was intensely integrated. They would do their intensive meditation for 4 hours in the morning, physically pushing their nervous system into those altered states. Then they'd walk 2 kilometers down the hill, do tech support in the office, digitize 60 years of backlogged high school records, and then teach 2 batches of students in the evening.
That is a very full day, I'll give you that.
And they used the internet to rigorously cross-reference what they were experiencing. When the ancient text described movements of prana, the author was looking up the modern physiology of the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system. They were trying to find the biological mechanisms behind the mystical experiences. That is a perfect marriage of 2 worlds.
Okay, look. Digitizing 60 years of high school records is a phenomenal act of service. I do not dispute their work ethic or their functional capability in IT. Right.
What I dispute is the claim that cross-referencing Wikipedia or any online medical text makes this a synthesis of science and spirituality. Science requires falsifiability. It requires independent replication.
But subjective experience.
If I tell you I meditated for 144 hours and experienced a state that aligns with neuroplasticity or quantum mechanics, you have no way of testing that. It remains a personal, subjective mythology. We just have to take the author's word for it.
Well, it's an autobiography.
Yes, but the danger of this idiosyncratic, untestable approach becomes glaringly obvious when we look at how the author escalates this cognitive focus. If Dharna is the tool they use to teach kids to type, they take that exact same tool and escalate it to the ultimate test of their synthesis, the Ashwamedha healing.
Ah, yes. The remote yogic healing method taught by their guru.
Yes, and this is where the narrative crosses a very dangerous line for me.
Dangerous?
Very. If the author is claiming to synthesize technology and spirituality, applying it to complex medical ailments is the ultimate stress test. The author claims to have developed sensitivity and remote assistance, their exact words, to treat people.
Yes, they do.
And we aren't talking about mild headaches or like general anxiety. They claim to have remotely treated muscular neuron disorder, labyrinthitis, sciatica, and even patients who had been in long-term comas.
I know it sounds wild.
This is where I have to throw the flag. Moving from teaching kids typing to claiming you can remotely heal a coma patient from a different country. That's a leap from unorthodox education into unverified, potentially hazardous medical intervention.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective based entirely on the empirical evidence provided in the text.
I'm listening.
You are looking at this through a purely Western allopathic lens, demanding a specific type of clinical trial before acknowledging an outcome. Let's look at the observable outcomes in the narrative. The author states that renowned, long-established local meditators couldn't solve these health issues.
Right.
But more importantly, recognized credentialed doctors actually began referring patients to the author. Some of these doctors were individuals the author had previously given personal computer training to. If this was just pure charlatanism, why would medical professionals risk their own reputations to refer patients with conditions as severe as a coma?
Because desperation exists in medicine. When allopathic medicine hits a wall, doctors are human and families are desperate. A referral in a moment of desperation is not empirical validation of a mechanism.
But listen to the specific conceptual synthesis the author makes to explain the mechanism. They literally compare this remote healing to IT remote assistance.
I mean, it's a catchy metaphor.
Let's break that down, though. In the IT world, if a server in London crashes, a technician sitting in Hyderabad
can access it remotely, diagnose the corrupted files, and restore the operating system without ever physically touching the hardware.
Right.
The author is suggesting that consciousness and human physiology operate on a network that is conceptually similar. The ancient Natha tradition built the sensitivity to that network. The Ashram healing is the software protocol.
Okay, but
So if a patient's nervous system is corrupted, say a coma, the author applies cognitive focus to remotely access that biological network and initiate a reboot. If credentialed doctors are observing measurable improvements in these patients, hasn't this remote assistance crossed from subjective mysticism into observable empirical utility? It works, even if our current medical instruments can't fully map the network yet.
That is a massive structural if. The analogy of IT remote assistance is clever, it's a great metaphor, but a metaphor is not a mechanism.
It explains the concept.
Sure. But in IT remote assistance, we know exactly how the signal travels. It travels through fiber optic cables, via TCP protocols, interacting with specific binary code. There is a verified physical infrastructure that we built and can measure.
True.
When you claim to remotely heal a coma patient, what is the infrastructure? Where is the fiber optic cable for human consciousness?
We don't have the tools to measure it yet.
And until we do, the author relies on the historical weight of the Natha Sampradaya to provide the authority for these claims, but provides absolutely no verifiable mechanism. And that brings me back to my core issue with this entire narrative.
Which is?
Whether it's showing a Hollywood movie to bypass educational discipline or claiming remote healing capabilities to bypass clinical medicine, the author constantly relies on exceptionalism. They bypass the rules. It's fascinating, it's a beautifully written story, but it is not a replicable framework for either education or science.
I see what you're saying.
You cannot build a scalable school system on a teacher who needs to break the rules to succeed. And you cannot build a medical system on a practitioner whose methods are entirely invisible.
Okay, I acknowledge your critique on scalability, but I think demanding mass scalability really misses the profound localized impact demonstrated in the text.
Localized? Yes.
Let's summarize where we've landed today. From my perspective, this autobiographical account proves that the rigid boundaries we draw between ancient mysticism and modern tech are entirely artificial. By combining the visual, modern engagement of Avatar, the highly practical utility of IT support, and the deep, brain-altering cognitive discipline of Purna Yoga, this author achieved measurable success.
In that specific context.
Yes, they took marginalized Koya tribal children and gave them extraordinary levels of concentration through tactile and auditory flow states. They took ancient Natha Sampradaya practices, modernized the terminology, and applied them to modern ailments, earning the respect of local medical professionals. It is a pragmatic, brilliant synthesis that addresses the whole human being, rather than treating them like a machine on an assembly line.
And to summarize my position, well, while I respect the author's lifelong dedication, their 144-hour meditative endurance, and their localized care for those children, I remain highly skeptical of the framework itself.
As a replicable model.
Exactly. The reliance on rule-breaking to engage students and the leap into untestable, extreme remote healing without a verifiable mechanism makes this an account of a fascinating, charismatic maverick. It is an unscalable personal mythology, not a cohesive synthesis of science and spirituality.
Yet, despite our friction on the epistemology here, we both see the localized outcome. I mean, the author's impact on the children at Shanti Ashram was profoundly positive.
Undoubtedly.
The dedication to digitizing 60 years of records, to providing tech support to the community, to sleeping in the computer lab just to be available for the kids, that level of personal commitment is incredibly rare.
It is. The desire to serve that specific community in the Totopeli Hills is highly evident, but the friction remains entirely in how we categorize, validate, and potentially replicate the methods used to deliver that service. I just do not believe this is a blueprint we can hand to the next generation of educators.
And I believe it points toward a future where we stop separating the mind from the machine. It seems the nature of belief, the weight of tradition, and the mechanics of education hold far more complexity than a simple binary allows.
Oh, absolutely.
There's just so much more to explore in how we interface our oldest spiritual technologies with our newest silicon ones.
It certainly makes you reconsider what actually constitutes an educational environment and, honestly, what limits we place on human focus.
It brings us right back to that initial image. We want the sterile, brightly lit room where everything is visible, quantifiable, neatly mapped onto a syllabus.
Naturally.
But sometimes, real breakthrough learning happens in the messy, unpredictable intersection of a mountain cave tradition, a broken generator, and a Hollywood sci-fi film. We'll leave you to ponder that intersection. Until next time.